Hi, and welcome to the first episode of the Parallax View Podcast. I'm your host, Richard McBain. On today's episode, I'll be talking with Tom Tullis, owner and founder of Fat Dragon Games. We'll talk with Tom about his first gaming experience and how it shaped his love of role-playing games. We'll also discuss his start with Fat Dragon Games almost 18 years ago, the changes he's encountered over that span, and where he sees the company heading in the future. Those topics, and whether it's Dr. Pepper or Coke, how he feels about hockey, and what he really thinks about D&D 4th Edition. All that and more on this inaugural episode of the Parallax View Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Tom, thanks so much for joining me today on the Parallax View. Thanks for being my first guest on what hopefully will be a long and successful podcast run. We'll see. But thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me. And thanks for having me on before you had Chenault.
Well, it came down to, I was looking at the list of potential folks to have on first, and it was between you and Chenault, and you made the cut. So
yeah, but I'm number one now.
You're always number one, at least in my eyes. I don't know if Chenault would take any umbrage to that statement, but hey, you're here, and we're going to have a hopefully an interesting conversation today about your history with gaming, your history with Fat Dragon Games, and how you started that company, and just some various other things. But I wanted to start off with kind of what I'm calling a most interesting fact. And this is an interesting fact about you that maybe a whole lot of people don't know about. It could be something simple like, you prefer crunchy peanut butter versus smooth peanut butter, or, hey, I'm a Dr. Pepper guy versus a Coke guy, or it could be whatever you want it to be. But whatever you feel comfortable sharing with me today about something about Tom that maybe a whole lot of people just don't know. So.
Wow, something people don't know.
Right.
Probably my most interesting secret is I am highly addicted to Coke Zero.
Okay.
I won't even say how many of those I go through a day, but it's a sizable amount.
Okay, so Coke Zero is
Coke Zero. You're basically I'm a mirror image of Chenault with his Dr. Pepper, which sucks, by the way.
What Dr. Pepper sucks.
Oh,
so
yeah.
we're putting that on the record. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So would it be fair to say that Coke Zero is your caffeine beverage of choice, or?
Oh yeah. Coffee
Definitely.
sucks too.
Okay. That was gonna be my next question is, are you a coffee drinker or?
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
It's almost as bad as Dr. Pepper.
Yeah. I drink coffee. I'm a coffee morning person typically. And then I will have to say that I'm on the Chenault side of the fence with the Dr. Pepper. That's really my.
Oh, dude, I don't even know if I want to be on this podcast now.
Have I already lost my first guest already? 2 minutes in. Yeah. Well, we'll skip past that. It's okay, and we'll move past it. But how are things otherwise? How are things up in your neck of the woods in Ohio?
Things are going good in Ohio. It's
yeah.
Nice. It's hot. I'm all ready for winter. Bring on the snow.
Yeah, that's you guys get a fair amount of snow up there, don't you? I mean, is that fair to say?
It depends on the year. I mean, we'll have years we get none, and then we'll have years where we just get dumped with it. It's really hit or miss.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, we of course being down here in the South, it's an oddity for us to get snow, any level of snow. So I've always felt like I was a kind of a northerner at heart. I'm a big hockey fan. So, and I enjoy those winter sports, if you will. So, which is
hockey is not a sport. I'm sorry.
Oh no,
it's ice skating and playing with a urinal puck. That's all it is. It is not a real sport.
Man, we really have lost each other in the first 5 minutes. That's okay. You know what? Despite all of these polar opposites, if you will, you and I, when we first met, I think we hit it off pretty quickly, and we'll get into that when we talk about Fat Dragon. But yeah, we've known each other for what?
Yeah, you and Jason hanging out at Gen Con.
Yeah, I want to say it was Gen Con 06 or 07, first time we met. I think that's right.
07 was the first one I met you guys at. Might have been '06.
Well, I want to say we attended just as attendees in '06, and then in '07, when I think the first year.
It was the first year you were working with Chenault at the booth, because I was there. Fat Dragon had a booth in '06, but I remember meeting you guys at Chenault's booth, so it would have to have been '07 then.
Yep, that was right. I think we did not meet until that '07 Gen Con, but meeting for the first time back then, we definitely hit it off. We were like-minded individuals, and we just connected on a lot of different levels. And so it's been a pleasure to get to know you better over those years, even though COVID has put a wrinkle in that, like with everybody else. But and hopefully this year, I'm crossing fingers about Gary Con. We'll see.
I had talked to Jason. It's probably been about 2 months ago now, but he had said something about 2023 for Gary Con 2, getting all of us together for that. So.
Oh, well, I'll have to reach out to Jason, because he's also, I know he went through a job change recently, and so he's kind of settling in with his new role. But yeah, that'd be great. I'd love for us to be able to get the band back together. If not for 23, maybe 24, or even after that, or maybe a different event. I know you're still doing Origins, right? So that could also be a potential. So, well, let's talk about, let's jump into kind of the meat of why we're here today is really tabletop gaming and just your kind of place in that space, if you will. So I always love hearing, talking with different people about their first experiences with tabletop gaming, whether it was role playing or board or otherwise. So kind of tell us what your first real exposure to gaming was, and how what that was like for you.
First real exposure just to any tabletop gaming would have been late '70s. There was a group at our local shop that played chainmail, and I'd go and watch that, and just kind of be a fly on the wall for that. They were older kid, I was pretty young at that point. These were older high schoolers and college age kids, but that really perked my interest and got me into painting minis and stuff like that. And then in late, would have been 19, or actually it was New Year's Day '81, a buddy of mine had brought over the Moldvay D&D basic set that he'd gotten for Christmas.
Yeah,
and tried that out, and that was actually the first time I'd heard of D&D. And so some other kids in my neighborhood had been into it. I asked if I could join, and they had a group going. It was a mix of White Box and AD&D Monster Manual, and then just some stuff that was taken at random out of the player's handbook, AD&D player's handbook, spells and classes and stuff. But it was all bolted on kind of a OD&D framework. And back then there wasn't any additions. Everything was D&D. We could run a basic D&D module with OD&D rules, with monsters out of the monster manual, and somebody who was using spells out of the AD&D player's handbook, and it all worked. We didn't look at it as separate editions back then. Like I said, that was around '80. Then around '82, I met up with another group at a local library that they met on Saturdays, and got in with them, and played off and on with them. To this day, we still get together occasionally and play. I guess we stopped about a few years ago, but I still keep in touch with all of them. So that was probably the longest game group I've had. Once I got to college, kind of got out of it, stopped playing D&D and stuff.
Sure.
Got into historical publications after college, which was largely military publications. And then that kind of led, I started my first business then, doing publishing work for aircraft history publications and stuff. And that business grew and got into the model hobby industry, because there was a lot of crossover with that.
Sure.
If I'm doing a book on a particular aircraft and there's a model kit company that does that aircraft, then I can take the research I did for the book and offer it to them for the markings and stuff for their model kit. And, I could make my work go further, spread around, and get, additional revenue streams for it. So that got me back into the hobby and games industry professionally. And then around 2003, we started seeing a sharp decline in historical book sales. And a lot of that was due to the internet.
Sure.
Prior to that, if you wanted to know what unit your grandfather flew in World War II, you went out and bought a book. Once the internet became more prevalent, you went and Googled it.
Right.
People don't go out and buy books just to get a specific piece of information anymore. They go to the internet. So the dynamic of the historical publications field changed dramatically within about 5 years. So in 2005, I was looking for a temporary new business, kind of as an escape hatch from the military publishing to tide me over till I could think about something more permanent to do. And since I had already had so many fingers in the hobby industry, the games, the hobby industry, and had contacts at lots of hobby shops that we sold the kit decals through, it just made sense to look at gaming, because a lot of these shops carried both. They were, overall hobby shops that had gaming stuff, they had model kits, whatever. So I could use those same distribution channels on a temporary basis and switch over. So I came up with the idea of doing a game company. So the first things we did were some D20 products, Starship deck plans, 2-dimensional deck plans and stuff.
Right.
And that was in 2005. And then by the end of that year, we'd come out with our first 3-dimensional papercraft touring set.
I think I remember those from even seeing, and I don't remember if when I attended Gen Con in 06, do you remember if you as Fat Dragon had a booth?
Vendor booth? We had a booth in 06.
I want to say that it's, if I remember correctly, my memory is definitely not what it used to be, that I want to say I remember seeing those papercraft models, if you will, or products for sale in 06, but I definitely remember them in the year after that.
Yeah, we had them in 06. That was our first full-fledged booth where we weren't squatting with someone else. We had our own booth in 06. And but yeah, we had stuff on display that year. We were as I said, it was set up to sell through existing hobby channels. So we sold things on physical CD-ROMs. We had CDs produced.
I remember those CDs as
different
well.
sets, and we sell those at cons and at hobby shops and stuff. And but yeah, 2005 was when I started Fat Dragon. The name was kind of cribbed from there was a wine that was out at the time called Fat Bastard Wine, and it was had a logo. God, so long ago. It was like 18 years ago. It was like a pig getting drunk, and it was called Fat Bastard Wine.
Right.
And it wasn't great wine, but I remember, and I'm not into wine, but I remember reading about this in a business magazine.
Sure.
Most people, who aren't really into wine, if they go into a wine store to buy a bottle of wine, they couldn't even think of a single wine brand or name to ask for. But this Fat Bastard Wine became like the #2 best-selling wine in the country for a while.
Oh, wow.
Simply because of the name recognition. People could remember that name. Somebody who never wasn't into wine, never bought wine, could walk in and remember, and with that fat pig logo, I want Fat Bastard Wine. So it wasn't that it was a great wine, it was just, it had a memorable name. So that was kind of where the catalyst for the idea of Fat Dragon Games. I wanted a name that tied in with the logo. So Dungeons and Dragons, you have this big fat portly dragon, and it's Fat Dragon Games, and people can associate the name with the mental image of the logo and remember it. So that was kind of where that came from.
Huh. See, I'd never heard that story before of where the genesis of the name for Fat Dragon came from, but it makes sense, and it's definitely, I would say that going back to the wine story, it may not be great wine, but it's great marketing, right? Because it does exactly what it's intended to do, which is to put that name in people's brains and have it stick there. So and have it associated with the image. Right. Because I don't know if you remember at our early booths, we had this giant
dragon stand up that we put above the level of the booth. It was on this big PVC
I do remember
pole.
that. Yep.
And there was no name with it. You just saw this big red dragon, but people knew that's Fat Dragon.
Yep. Instantly recognizable.
We had that for years. Gen Con, must have been 15 foot in the air because it was a 10-foot booth, and we stuck that above the poles. And but people saw the big Fat Dragon. That's Fat Dragon. They could see it from across the vendor hall.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely what was a smart move on your part when starting the company, right? Is, hey, how do I make this stand out, right? In a vendor hall full of companies that are all trying to do the same thing. So that's definitely
many companies back then, they wanted to have these cool fantasy names, really serious names.
Right.
I just wanted something goofy and memorable.
Yeah, right. That kind of humorous take on the hobby that we all love and enjoy, right? Sometimes you're right, can be a little heavy in its approach, and so going that route definitely also I think help stand you guys apart a little bit. So
and others have done it too. Look at Gen Con back then. Look at how many secondary market game sellers there were.
Oh, sure.
But the one that everybody remembers is Crazy Igor.
Oh, yeah. Love Crazies.
I miss Crazy Igor so much.
You and me both.
But there was at least a dozen companies there that sold secondhand market games.
Mm-hmm.
But Crazy Igor's was the one everybody remembers to this day, a decade after they went out of business. Everybody remembers Crazy Igor.
Yep. Yeah, I remember the first time in 2006. That was my first Gen Con. And yeah, just you could see that booth setup from halfway across the vendor hall, and that hall
was great.
Yeah, it's huge. If you've never been to Gen Con, never been in the exhibitor hall, even back in 2006, it was gigantic back then. You could see that setup from, like I said, halfway across the exhibitor hall, and it stood out, and it was very noticeable and recognizable, and it was so much fun just to shop in, just to spend time just going through all his products. So,
it was Crazy Igor's was like a time machine, and it's not to take away. There were other ships or other shops there just like that, but it came down to the name. Everybody still remembers that shop because of the name. I couldn't name half of the other ones. I can't think of the names right now, but I can always remember Crazy Igor. Yeah. 20 years from now, I'm going to remember Crazy Igor's.
Yeah, it's interesting how that works, man. You have those things that stick in your brain, and for one reason or another, right? And Crazy is definitely one of them. And thinking back to your early days in gaming, your first exposure was really Dungeons and Dragons. It was D&D, right?
Mm-hmm. First thing I actually played, yeah.
First thing you ever actually played. Now, thinking back, even leading up to that, before you had an actual real exposure, let's say, to role-playing games, right? Mm-hmm. What do you think, looking back at that time, were you into other hobbies or activities as a young boy growing up that really kind of opened you up to the idea of that's something that would interest you? Or what do you think, because I know there have been people.
Yeah. I mean, I loved building model kits. That's what led to my first business doing, aviation publications.
Right.
But it's the working with little tiny models and stuff, be it, a cockpit on an airplane or, figure of a knight or a skeleton painted up. It's the little tiny things like that have always fascinated me and always been a hobby. So I think the thing that really kind of got me into D&D first was, you've got these funny little dice and these little, 1-inch miniature figures, and that was all you needed.
Right.
And, our neighborhood gang was a great group of kids. There's about 5 or 6 of us that played regularly. And then, like I said, I think it was like a year and a half later, I got in with a second group at the local library. And so we had I was playing 2 different groups nonstop at that point. And it just something I just really fell into, but I just fell in love with it immediately. Because I've always been into art, and, building stuff. And here it was this hobby that just fed into that. You can
Right.
build the terrain, out of cardboard and paint the miniature figures up. And it was fantastic.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Like you see a lot. In my first exposure was through a friend of mine, who I got to know through my Boy Scout troop. And he brought some RPGs with him on a camping weekend trip that we took. And that was my first exposure, was on that trip. He had it set up in his tent with like 3 or 4 other guys in the troop. They were all, sitting around inside this tent playing the old Top Secret, which was literally if you remember the old box set.
Mm-hmm.
That was my very first, and leading up to that, I also kind of like you, I didn't do, I wasn't doing kind of any model building back then, but I was heavy into comic books. That was really my thing growing up. Middle school was just comic book reading. And so, but that was my first exposure to actual gaming, any type of actual, beyond what it was that you may have had exposure to through your family, with Monopoly or SAR, whatever else, those kind of, what I call big box store games back in the day, late 70s, early 80s. Right. And so that was my first exposure to a real actual role-playing game. And instantly I was fascinated by all of it, really. But I think it's always interesting to hear when people talk about their, like I said, their early exposure or first exposure to gaming, whether it's role playing or board or miniature or otherwise, to kind of hear what it was or the things that they were interested in before that initial exposure. And art is definitely something that seems to come up a lot. They're into art, or they were into drawing, or they were into like you were, building models and kits and things like that. There's definitely those things that surround the gaming world that were in existence well before gaming as we know it today, right? Which is now become a hugely popular. It's kind of crazy to think about how it was back then and what it's kind of become now. It's really mainstream now, which is
It's
crazy. I think it's just everywhere, and I think it's great. I've seen things online. Of course, you're online enough, and you see and read enough. But I personally think that the more the merrier, and I'm all for this. I don't know if Renaissance is the right term, but just it's gone from underground to mainstream, and that's been really interesting to watch over the years. So, but yeah, so Fat Dragon, you started in 2005, and it started off as the not where it kind of exists today, right? Would we say as a company, where your focus being back then, not on the 3D. Well, let me back up. So at what point did you look to kind of transition, may not be the right word, but look to move Fat Dragon into kind of the 3D printer space as far as products and offerings you were giving your customers? When did that idea, or how did that idea come about?
That was 2014, 2015. I was reading in a business journal about what they expected the inflection point. See, 3D printing, like an FDM 3D printer, those first came out in 1989.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
The problem was the patents were held for 25 years. So they mainly made them for industrial purposes. And you had a kind of an underground movement called Rep that started up for people to make their own. They couldn't make them and sell them, but it was all these plans for how to make them at home with off-the-shelf parts from like Radio Shack and stuff. And in 2014, once those not all of the patents expired, but the key ones to allow manufacturers to start up selling 3D printers expired. And God, I forget the business publication I was reading, but it was in late 2014, I think. And they were expecting the consumer inflection point would be around early 2017 for these printers to have enough market penetration that consumers would pick up on them, and you'd see the consumer inflection point for purchasing these printers, and then, needing all the, odds and ends that go with them, filament and files for them and whatnot.
Sure.
So I got to thinking about this, and for about 6 months. And the thing about gamers is we are more heavily into tech stuff than the mainstream population on average.
I would agree with that.
We're early adopters.
Sure.
If you take 100 people off the street and 100 gamers, a higher percentage of the gamers will probably be the first ones to adopt the newest tech thing, be it the newest iPhone model or whatever. So if they're saying the general population, the inflection point for 3D printing was going to be 2017, I figured a year off of that, early 2016 would be when the gaming community would have their inflection point. So I wanted to get something out. We did a Kickstarter in September of 2015 that would deliver by early 2016 for that gaming inflection point, and it just hit perfectly. It did about 3 times what I expected it to, that first Dragonlock Kickstarter. And the rest is history. It's just done so well. We've just migrated over from the papercraft side,
right?
Which had really run its course. The papercraft, we had, I want to say, about 250 plus terrain sets.
Oh, wow.
And so we really covered everything a gamer could need. We were just starting to rehash things. So it was a perfect time as a company to switch into something new. And we still sell those papercraft sets to this day. I mean, I sell tons of those things.
I was going to ask if
RPG.
Right. Okay. So you're still.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that makes sense.
Tons of people don't have a 3D printer, but they have a 2D printer, an inkjet or a laser printer.
Sure.
But there's just not a lot more. We could do some esoteric stuff, but it really wouldn't be cost effective for us to do it. There wouldn't be enough demand for some of those subjects because we've hit all the larger demand subjects with the papercraft. So, in late 2015, we switched to 3D printing and been doing that ever since.
Now, was your personal exposure to 3D printing around that time, or had you already, as just a hobbyist, been
I got
in that
into it
space?
as a hobbyist about a year before.
Okay.
That's why I was getting interested in reading up on
Sure.
it more in late 2014. Because, once I got this thing sitting in my office that could spit something, I could think of something, design it, and spit it out on this printer. I mean, I was just hooked. This was fantastic. And so I really started getting interested in it from the business aspects of it. And that's, when I started reading up on it more, and where they projected, the consumer market was headed with it over the next 5 years. And that's, when I decided this is where I needed to go as a company, because this is something that's just so perfect for gamers. You can print your figures, you can print your terrain, you can buy a file from a company and go in and modify it, pretty easily. There's a lot of off-the-shelf software that's free. Watch it, some tutorials on YouTube for a few hours, and you're going to be able to go in and make some basic edits to it and then spit it out on your printer. And then the other side of this is people, and this is a really widespread thing, people will just buy these files even though they don't want to print them right now. This idea of having this massive library on your hard drive of miniatures and terrain that you can just call up at an instant and print it out whenever you need it. People have never had that before in this hobby. You had to save your money. You had to go out and buy a terrain set, and excuse me, maybe it has 10 walls in it and you need 11. Well, then you got to go out and buy another whole terrain set just to get that one wall you needed. Well, now if you need 11 walls, you just print out 11 walls. If I don't need this other piece, I'm not going to print it. Maybe I'll need it 5 years from now. I'll print it then. Or I need a necromancer for tonight's game. I'm going to spit out this miniature real quick and just put a quick paint job on it. It's this idea that you can have this massive library of gaming products sitting virtually on your computer, and then in a matter of hours, you've got a physical copy in your hand. And that flexibility, that ability to customize these products, the industry had never seen anything like that before. And it's democratized things for the most part. It used to be you had a handful of miniature manufacturers because of the cost of buying spin casters and metal and getting that experience spin casting. Now you don't need any of that technical skill level to print something out, really. If you want to teach yourself Blender, you can go in and learn to sculpt. And that was something people never had the ability to do before. People couldn't, if you weren't truly, adept at physical sculpting, you were never going to be able to sculpt a miniature and green stuff or putty or anything like that. You didn't have, a kiln to vulcanize it. You didn't have the stuff to make the RTV rubber molds. You didn't have a spin caster and everything to melt the lead and spin it out. Yeah, this massive financial outlay is gone. Now it's just a digital file and a $200 printer, and that's it. Right. It's revolutionized the hobby forever.
Yeah, I agree, definitely. And I think the other interesting thing that what you have done with Fat Dragon, kind of being, first out of the gate with this kind of a setup for consumers and gamers is really, we kind of live in a world now where the idea of ownership is a lot of times a misnomer, right? You pay for streaming services and you pay for access to media and content, but you don't truly own it, right? And so the idea that, yeah, I can go on your site and purchase those files and I truly own them. And then I have the ability to access them and use them as many times as I want, right?
Right.
Without that fear of access to that being taken away from me at some point, because streaming service X wants to no longer make that available to me. And so I can't access that content or that media anymore. So that's an appeal for me, or it has been.
It is. And even with a physical product, let's say you invested hundreds or thousands of dollars in a physical terrain product.
Right.
And that company stops making it or goes out of business, but then you need some more. Like I said, you need 3 more walls. Well, but with the digital, once you buy that digital file, it's yours forever. It's just up to you whether you want to invest the time to print it. And so, it gives you a level of control as a consumer that has never been seen in this industry before.
Yeah, it does. So so in terms of actually making the models and files for Fat Dragon, are you exclusively doing that, or do you have other folks that are helping you with that, or how is that process?
I do the majority of it myself, but I do have contract sculptors that do stuff. I was just messaging one this morning. He's doing some miniatures for our next Kickstarter. I contract out for things just when there isn't time to do it in-house, which is pretty often.
Sure.
But most of our stuff is done with Blender. Araberto, who's doing a batch for me now of miniatures, I know he uses ZBrush. You've got another guy that does CAD work for me. I think he does I can't think of the CAD program, but he does a lot of the CAD stuff for me and such, because I don't do that. I tend to do more of the art stuff with the Blender sculpting, or I will do hard modeling with the World War Tesla tanks and things like that.
Gotcha. So I know primarily your models are made, and this may be a correct or somewhat incorrect statement. My understanding, most of your models that you have available are primarily, would it be fair to say, made for FDM printing versus resin, or is there a delineation there? Or
everything is made. Everything is designed for FDM printers.
Okay.
And I've got a, and this goes back to my history in the model industry. I've got a lot of experience working with both UV curable resins for model prototyping and UV curable inks in the print industry. Anytime you print on a surface that's not paper, like say an aluminum water bottle, or there'll be inks for like different coatings on hard surfaces, like book covers, things like that. Anything that's kind of an oddball type thing like that, or printing on plastics, those are all UV curable inks, and they're resin inks. So it's essentially the same as the resin you're using in a resin 3D printer. Well, the VOCs given off by these UV curable resins are pretty harmful.
Sure.
And they downplay a lot of this, or if you look at the spec sheets that come with the resins, and it'll go through the certain hazards on it. It'll just say information unavailable. And so they downplay a lot of this and say, well, these things have been around for 25 years now. People have used them. Yeah, they have, but we used them in an industrial setting. We had active air exchange units, pumping, the bad air out, filter. You wore long sleeves, nitrile gloves. You had safety goggles on, the works. Just be able to be safely around this stuff. And now they're telling people, oh, see, it's been around for so long. It's safe to just put in your bedroom and have this thing running with no air exchange system. Only part of it. The VOCs that you're breathing in are very harmful to you. And, we saw people in the print industry with these inks and stuff that would develop, lots of health issues from it. And, it wasn't everybody, but it was enough to make me know I do not want this thing in my home.
Sure.
And so everything for the company, and I know there's other people like me that just aren't comfortable with it. There's plenty that are, and that's great. If you make that decision that this is something you're okay with having in your home, great, more power to you. And there's plenty of models out there because it's so much easier to design for resin printing because you don't have that level of mechanical design skill necessary to sculpt it as supportless. You can just have things going off in every which direction,
right? And
it will print, whereas it won't print on an FDM like that. So for Fat Dragon, we've kind of made a commitment to our customers that, while our stuff will print on resin just fine, if you've got a resin printer, you're not going to have any problems printing it. But we design it and guarantee that it will print on an FDM just fine for you. And I don't see that changing for us anytime soon. I know there are some technologies coming down the pike, and I can't really say too much more on that because a couple of these companies I have NDAs with, but
right.
That may change for us if the consumer market changes and there's a widespread adoption of new technologies. But until that time, if that time comes, because COVID has changed a lot of things.
Oh, sure.
Companies that were focusing prior to it on the consumer end, with how industries are changing and pulling production out of overseas countries now and looking to bring it home, these printing companies, these printer companies are now saying, well, wait a minute, there's all of a sudden going to be a massive influx of potential customers on the industrial side now here wanting to bring short run production to this country in-house. So let's put the consumer side of this on hold for a while. Let's go and focus on this new market that has a lot more money. So can't name any names, but
sure.
if you follow the bigger names that make the $500,000 printers and on up, you'll see the last 2 years, they've been pumping out new models like crazy and courting that market. And the marketing has shifted largely to, hey, you don't have to make this overseas. You don't have to produce this, 10,000 unit run and then ship it over here and have it sit trying to go through customs for months. And maybe you'll get it when you want it. Maybe you won't. You can produce what you need as you need it in-house and, like this. And here are because they're really ramping up the materials available and the range of mechanical properties of those materials to try to meet more industrial needs for this type of thing. So I think the consumer side for some of these more advanced printers is going to lag for a while because there's just not as much money there as there is when you can make one unit and sell it for $400,000 or $500,000 and then have service contracts and everything else with it versus trying to hit, say, a $500 price point for a consumer one. And then you've got to deal with the consumer calling tech support and this doesn't work, that doesn't work, versus a single entity and, with an industrial side that's buying multiples of these super expensive printers. So for right now, I see the market staying at least for the next 2 to 3 years, largely the same as you see it now. It's going to be either FDM or the UV resins in the format that you see them right now. So until that changes, Fat Dragon's going to stick with FDM.
Yeah, and that's that that definitely, it's been an interesting view from my perspective as just a hobbyist, right? Obviously I'm not in business or in the business of 3D printing or model making for 3D printing. But that's one of the things when I first got my very first printer, which was a Creality CR6. Couple things became very apparent pretty quickly after purchasing that first printer. One, it's kind of like when people find out you own a truck, everybody wants to ask you to, use it to print something for them, right? And then the other thing is that 3D printing is, in my opinion, is still very squarely in the hobbyist space and not in the consumer space. And so I'd be interested to hear from your perspective. I think it's getting closer. It feels like it's getting closer to the consumer space, but I think it's still not there yet for a lot of reasons. But I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on, do you ever see the 3D printing fully getting to a consumer space, or is it going to be more kind of not able to get there for various reasons?
Well, the state it's in right now, particularly with FDM, it is more akin to a power tool than a digital product.
Right.
If you go and buy a laser printer, you literally plug in the USB cord and download a driver and you're good to go. You don't have to calibrate, you don't have to do anything. Just put the toner cartridges in and you're good. Whereas a 3D printer, it's an analog print process that has a digital controller. So it's more akin to a CNC machine, which also uses G code. That's where the G code for the 3D printers come from, is the CNC industry. And people don't get into it and get frustrated and get rid of the printer because they go into it thinking there's not going to be a learning curve to it. Right. It's just going to be plug it in, hit the print button, and it's going to work like my inkjet printer. And that's not the case. It is a power tool, and it's something that you have to develop a skill with.
Right.
Just like if, I'm using a saw or a drill or anything else, to get really good at it and be able to do it cleanly and, get the end result you want, there is a learning curve. You have to develop that skill, and the 3D printer is the same way. Now, are there technologies coming down the pike? Yeah, there are, that are very easy, very consumer friendly. But as I said, right now, they're focusing on the industrial side of it. And until we get to a point where that market segment is saturated and they decide they need, in order to expand, to go into the consumer market with those type of technologies, things aren't going to change. I really don't say. I think it's going to stay a hobbyist thing. It's been very good for the game industry simply because people are very motivated to learn that skill, because the amount of money you can save. If you look at Warhammer figures, they're like $20 a miniature. Or being able to print it yourself for 10 cents, that's a hell of an incentive to take the time and learn this skill. Same way for terrain. I can spend $200 and get a handful of pieces, or I can spend $50 and run as many pieces as I want out for 20, 25, 30 cents. It's just the cost savings aren't even close. They're so dramatic that it is worth the hassle of learning the new skill for people. But for the general consumer industry to adopt this, for making knickknacks or whatever at home, it's just there's no. Let's say I wanted to print, I don't know, a holder for some kitchen knives or something, or whatever. Do I really want to learn a whole new skill for this one item, or do I want to run down and buy it at Walmart or go on Amazon and order it for $7-8? Yeah, I could print it for one, but I really don't want to learn a whole skill for just this one item.
Right.
Whereas the gaming industry, it's a never-ending stream of items. I always need new terrain. I always need new miniatures. It's not just buying a printer to make one thing. It's buying a printer to make a ton of new things for the next decade. For every new game I try, there's something I can print for it. So for it to be adopted by mainstream users, it's going to have to become easier, more plug and play. And there's going to have to be enough things, utilitarian type things, that people could save the money on learning, putting this in and going to the trouble of learning how to use it. For just printing one or two things, the incentive isn't there.
Yeah, I would agree, and that's probably. I think you hit the nail right on the head. That for it to really live and exist in the consumer space, you're right. The non-gamer part of society, if you will, there's got to be more kind of incentivized reasons for them to look to purchase a device like that and then really get their money's worth out of it, right? And I think that's
I've been in it for like 8 years now, and I've printed exactly, I think, two things, household items. One was a retainer clip for a trim piece on window blinds that had been like 15 years old, and the old clips, and I took them off.
Oh, right.
I got new replacement windows recently.
Right.
The old clips are breaking, so I took one, designed it, and printed a bunch out and made myself new clips.
Mm-hmm.
And then something else was a little is a retainer piece you put a screw in for a mount on a desktop light. But I think those are the only two things, actual utilitarian things for around the house I've printed in 8 years now. So if that was all it was, I would have never have gotten into printing to do those two things. I would have just bought the items.
Right. Just gone down to Target and bought the replacement set of clips you needed and gone about your day. Right. So,
yeah. So until things change, and when it does change, it's going to change from a number of the change will come from a number of different directions.
Right.
Once the first thing that has to come is the printer that's, easy to use and can print things with the mechanical properties necessary for the items that want to be printed. If it needs to be flexible, you're going to have a flexible material. If it needs to be rigid, whatever, if the dimensional tolerances have to be within a certain amount, the printer's going to have to be able to handle that. But imagine, let's say you have a company that makes night lights, and you want to sell them in Walmart and Target and wherever else, and they may give you a 12-inch square section of space in an aisle for your products. So maybe you could fit 6 products in there, but your company makes 100. But they say, well, we're only going to give you shelf space for 6. So you got to, that really limits your ability to sell your products through conventional pipelines. But now imagine you can put 3D printable versions of those nightlight covers and everything. You can sell the core nightlight, a single unit, through Walmart, Target, whatever, that has no cover on it. But then all of the covers you sell online, hundreds of them, they're 3D printable. So now that bottleneck of distribution is gone away, because you just need to sell the part that plugs in and holds the bulb. And then people go on your website, and maybe it's included in the price or whatever, and you get the download for free, but they come on your website and print the customizable part, the thing that would have had to have been separate units on the store shelf that you would have originally been limited to 6 versions of. Now the consumer has hundreds to pick from. They just have to go get your base unit. So there's an incentive for you to change your business model over and go into 3D printing. Once the consumer is able to do this, the consumer is then incentivized to buy your product over someone else who's not going this route, because they either have to pick from the 6 versions of another competing company that are on the shelf, or they buy your base unit and they can go pick from 100, 200 different versions on your website, and their kids can each get the exact one they want, if it's SpongeBob or whatever, and customize these things. So that makes your company's product much more attractive, because people can get exactly what they want, not be forced to pick from a predetermined amount based on what the buyer at the brick and mortar store is willing to give you as far as shelf space.
Yeah, I mean, that all, kind of leads me into, and you mentioned or kind of hit on this earlier, talking about kind of where you see Fat Dragon in 5 years from now, or even beyond that. You kind of hit on that already, but is there anything from a company perspective that envision Fat Dragging maybe moving into that they're not currently doing, or anything that would be a kind of a new avenue or path that might be something that would be a departure, let's say, from how you're kind of operating today?
Yes, there are 2 areas that I've got us kind of doing exploratory work on that we would move into, but I'm not going to say what those are.
Fair enough.
It's a very competitive market.
Sure.
And
Sure.
So until we're ready to drop the hammer on it, I won't be saying anything publicly.
Yeah, no. Well, but definitely it sounds like when what you've been doing since day one, and Tom is always looking towards the next thing, right? And not just sitting back and kind of resting on what you've got currently. So that's always,
no, you have to innovate or you will fall behind in the market. It's the way things have always been. I mean, okay, I started in 2005. I'm coming up on my 18th anniversary here, about 6 months. Let's see. 18 years before I started, it would have been 1987. Look what changed in the industry from 87 to 2005.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And now we're, double that. So you have to keep innovating with this stuff, this industry. And there's so many new technologies coming down. We partnered with a company called Mirrorscape to do these augmented reality dungeons for people that get together online. So that's one area. We're licensing them our designs for that. But as I said, there's two other areas I see things evolving in the industry, and we're just starting to take some, baby steps and make some, just doing some exploring in those right now, so that if things start looking like this, these things are going to come to fruition, that we're ready to, pull the trigger on them and go. We don't have to sit there and do a bunch of business analysis and is this a good idea? Is this not a good idea? Or try to get up to speed from nothing. We'll already have everything lined up and ready to go if we decide to go down those avenues.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I think that goes along with you're looking from, let's say, 87 to 2005, even during that time, is obviously the advent or the creation of crowdfunding. I know that's been a fairly decent part, I would say, or good chunk of what Fat Dragon does in terms of their business, and it seems to have been even to now been a very successful avenue for you as a company to reach more customers and bring more products to the market. Do you see that changing for Fat Dragon in the future, or is that still going to be part of your business plan, I guess?
No, I don't see us divorcing ourselves from crowdfunding. With my first publishing company I had, we sold through just, conventional distribution channels where we took a, 60% hit on everything, just right out the door, to the wholesaler, and then they would sell to the retailer at a 40% discount, who then, sold it, at that markup to the consumer. The great thing about crowdfunding is we cut out a lot of those middle stages, those middlemen, so to speak, and those discounts come out of it. So we can charge what we need to for myself, my contractors, and we make what we need to, but then the consumer pays less for the product because we don't have all these other people along the way to get it to them that have to take a cut too.
Right.
So everybody benefits. We do design, we put it up. If there's enough demand on the crowdfunding, then we have stretch goals. If there's enough demand for those, we put additional stretch goals in. So it eliminates a lot of the risk for us because we have the money up front. We know if there's demand for something or not. Before we started doing Kickstarter, I would put a set out. Maybe it would sell, maybe it wouldn't. But if it didn't, and I spent the last 30 days putting the set together, well, it's going to be kind of hard to make the mortgage this month because not enough people bought that set, or they saw it as a digital product and think, well, I don't really need it right now. Maybe I'll need it in a year or two. I'll buy it then.
Right.
Well, that's great, but that doesn't help me with my mortgage and my health insurance and car payment right now that are due on the 1st of next month. Whereas the crowdfunding, we put the sets up for the next year, we get that money, and I know I'm covered for the next 12 months. I can comfortably produce these sets. If there's not enough demand and we don't unlock a stretch goal, there's no time invested in it. We wrap up the campaign, we start a new one. So it's allowed the company to be more financially healthy than it otherwise would have, because we don't have to be conservative and keep doing treading the same ground because we know it's popular. We can work in stretch goals now that we've gotten requests for, but maybe would not have been popular enough on their own to just put out as a straight release, but put in as a free stretch reward on the Kickstarter, we can do it. So we're able to fill a lot more of the esoteric requests from customers without taking that huge risk financially of doing that.
Right.
The crowdfunding gives us that assurance up front. Yes, we've got the money. We can devote. I know what I can pay my sculptors. I know I'm covered for my time. And so it takes a lot of that stress off. And then, double that with having it be a digital product. I'm not sitting here right now today like a lot of other companies are because of, we're 2 quarters of negative, domestic growth in this country. We're in a recession. That is the definition of a recession. You have a lot of companies that are sitting on products that they ordered a year ago, sitting in warehouses that they can't move right now.
Right.
When I worked in publishing, we had to rent warehouse space. We had to rent pallet space to have books stored on. And so you're paying for that space you're renting. You're paying for insurance. That just keeps piling up on a product that you can't move right now. I can't imagine what some of these companies are going through on the physical side of things, not just in the game industry, but anywhere.
Sure.
Whereas my products that are coming out, they're basically pre-sold. Everything that sold at the Kickstarter covered them. And we can now focus on the next Kickstarter. If it does well, great. If it doesn't, not many people take it. We just won't unlock as many stretch rewards. So we're not taking that risk with it other than the core products. So it keeps us more nimble and more financially healthy to be able to weather financial situations like right now, economic situations. We got through the crash in 2008.
Right.
We weathered that that was tough. 3 years and 3 years into a new company. But,
yeah. Oh yeah.
Got through it, and we'll get through this one just fine too. What we found with the pandemic is people nested. You didn't have a choice. Everything was shut down initially.
Sure.
But even after it, people are staying in. They're wanting to do things at home, and they game. They, instead of going out and spending $70 on Friday night for dinner and a movie, they're staying in. They're inviting their friends over, getting pizza and buying games and stuff and playing D&D and whatnot. So far, the pandemic has not affected us sales wise. I mean, our online sales day to day outside of crowdfunding, 2020 in the middle of the pandemic was our best year ever.
Yeah. And I think a lot of companies like yours probably had the same result, right? Is that people just weren't going out for obvious reasons, and those funds were being funneled into other directions that maybe traditionally weren't happening, or at least to the level that they happened during 2020 and even 21.
2020 was our best year ever. 2021 was our second best year ever, and this year's on par with 2021 up to today. So the pandemic shifted people into this nesting mentality, and it really hasn't changed much. In 2+ years now, 2.5 years now, it really hasn't changed. We're seeing that sales spike still continue on. So I think it's going to be a number of years before people really get back. I hear from people, not just gamers, but neighbors and stuff that still aren't comfortable with that idea of going out to large crowds.
Right.
Or they discovered that really isn't something they miss. So there's not this eagerness to go back to it. They'd rather maybe go out and have dinner, or just have friends over or whatever. So this may be a sea change for us culturally too here, for maybe the next 5 years. Maybe, I don't think it'll go 10 years. But I think for, another 3 to 5 years, we're going to see things like this. And then, eventually, it's like anything else in our culture, it doesn't last for, forever. But it came on overnight, but I don't see it going away overnight.
I would agree. Yeah, I think we're still in the long game here, and so I would agree with you that we're probably looking at another 3 to 5 years where this is kind of quote the norm for a good chunk of society. And so, well, I would say that obviously crowdfunding was a smart move for you and Fat Dragon. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention your YouTube channel, because I'll tell you, Tom, you have cultivated and created a really great resource, not obviously not just for your company itself, but I've watched a lot of your videos, and your presentation style, your the way that you present your information in those videos, which are, truthfully there to help kind of support and prop up your company and the products you sell. But every one of those videos just chock full of YouTube comments about people just so grateful for the way that you explain those technical details with owning a printer and maintaining a printer, and then also printing out your files. I mean, that YouTube channel is a wonderful resource. And I think that the community in large, even if they're not people that maybe run the type of printers that you feature on your videos, I think you have a great reach with that resource and that platform. And it's been another brilliant move for you and Fat Dragon in that regard.
Well, it goes back to what we were discussing earlier about the 3D printers really being power tools, and the consumer needing to develop a certain skill level to successfully operate it. I'm not going to be selling any products if my consumers can't print them. Creating that channel and not just relying on them finding that, obtaining that skill or finding that information from somebody else on YouTube, it was essential that I'd be able to come up with something that could take people from ground zero with printing, show them how to build the printer, how to level it, how to troubleshoot basic issues like under extrusion, how to change your nozzles. I had to create an online repository for that skill knowledge for them that they can keep going back to, for new customers or customers who are new to 3D printing, to feel like they had enough confidence or be safe enough to make that investment, not just in my product, but also in the printer itself.
Right.
And so, one of the reasons that, I know a lot of companies depend only on crowds, their crowdfunding income is almost their entire income for their company. And with us, I don't want to get into, numbers, but crowdfunding is not that big of a deal for us. And it's because we have the whole package, and we are, people know if they come to Fat Dragon and buy this stuff, we're not just saying, here it is, good luck printing it.
Right.
It still shocks me to this day how many companies selling 3D printable models don't include an instruction document with it.
Right.
It's literally just a zip file of STL files, and there's no instructions telling you specific things you need to know about printing that specific model. So, I try to differentiate Fat Dragon from other companies by the level of consumer support we offer. We have the YouTube channels videos. You can sit down, you can watch things. If you have a jam, here's how you clean out your hot end and put a new nozzle on, step by step by step. Here's the product, but here's the things you need to know about this part. Here's an actual PDF instruction document with each one we sell. The third leg of that is, our forums and our Facebook group, where you can come on and get one-on-one help, and somebody there will help you.
Right.
We're not just saying, here's your product, good luck, don't bother us again till you want to buy something. We've never been like that. If you buy our product, we will help you and support you.
Yeah. And that definitely sets you apart from a lot of the other companies or groups out there, or even individuals that are making 3D files, STL files, and making them available to customers. So I think that's also another thing that, differentiates you from the crowd there. So kind of getting towards the end here, but wanted to have a couple things to wrap up on. So I know as Fat Dragon is concerned, what if people want to just, if they're going to be attending an event, a convention? I know Gen Con is next week, and I know that Fat Dragon doesn't really attend Gen Con anymore. But you do have other annual events that you attend as a company regularly. Outside of Origins, are there any other events that folks could come and see you in the flesh and kind of meet and greet and chat with you about whatever?
Yeah, I mean, we got out of it, with the pandemic.
Sure.
I'll be at Gamehole Con coming up later this year. That'll be the next one, and then we'll see what happens for 2023. But The interesting thing that's, it used to be, we always did, even when I worked in the hobby industry, before Fat Dragon, you did conventions to get FaceTime or to get your product in front of new consumers. And the internet has really changed this a lot. Social media, YouTube in particular. Let's just look at the biggest convention out there, Gen Con.
Right.
The last year we were there was like 5 years ago. It was like 68,000 people.
Right.
And, I had a booth. I didn't get 68,000 people in front of my booth in 4 days. I maybe had, I wouldn't even know, maybe a couple thousand people actually make the foot journey in front of the booth. Of those, a fraction stopped and looked at what we did, and maybe 3/4 of them were existing customers that just come by to say hi or pick something up to support us, and maybe only 20-25% were actually new customers. So in a weekend like that, buying the booth, buying the insurance, getting the hotel rooms for me, because I'd have a crew there for several shifts a day, and it's an expensive proposition.
Oh, sure.
And we would pick up maybe 40 new customers each year.
Yeah.
We got a lot of repeats, but they were existing customers.
Right.
I'm going there to get new customers. And now I have a YouTube channel with, it's somewhere over 80,000. It's probably like 82, 83,000 subscribers now.
Yeah.
So I've got more subscribers than people attend Gen Con. And that's just subscribers. I get millions of views a year. People who don't subscribe but still view and see the products.
Right.
And you get anywhere from 500 to a couple thousand new subscribers every month. And it doesn't cost me anything but my time to produce those videos. And so I think what myself and other companies in the industry are finding is YouTube, TikTok, Discord, all these ways of directly interfacing with your customers and potential customers over the internet are far more effective, both from your time investment and your financial outlay, than actually doing a physical convention. I can go spend 2 or 3 hours making a video, put it up on YouTube, and I will get more people view it, and we'll get more new subscribers and more new customers on my drive-through RPG customer list within that first week than I've ever gotten at Gen Con or any of these other smaller cons. So conventions moving forward are going to definitely be less of a focus, because if nothing else, forget the financial outlay, the time investment for them. It's going to take you half a week, if not a full week, to prepare for a con, get displays ready and whatnot. You have the week that you're there. Right. Well, that's 2 weeks of production time lost
that you're focusing on prepping for attending an in-person event. Right.
Imagine what I could do with that 2 weeks for another stretch goal or a core product for the next Kickstarter. I mean, that time is worth a lot of money.
Yeah.
So, like I said, we'll be at Gamehole coming up, be at GaryCon in March, but as far as big conventions and everything goes into putting on, the booth there, which there's a lot of, you've worked for Troll Lord, there's a lot of work behind the scenes to get that booth up and running.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure it really makes sense for us at this point, considering the reach we have with the YouTube channel. Because, like I said, within a matter of days, I've gotten, within a matter of hours, I've gotten more people viewing any video I do than that ever come through my booth in 4 days at a convention. I get more new customers within the first week than I ever do at a convention. So I think things have just changed. And again, it goes back to our earlier conversation of, looking forward and looking forward, the next 3 to 5 years, how the industry is going to change, how we change with it. I don't want to become a dinosaur. I don't want to keep clinging to the things that we were doing, 16, 18, 20 years ago for my two businesses that maybe no longer are the best ways to do things.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely, even when you can have a former Star Trek cast member in your booth, as a draw.
That was us. We did have a former Star Trek cast member in our booth many years ago.
And somehow that was you. And somehow
And it wasn't Troll Lord's
I
booth.
know.
It was my booth. That
It
had a
was
former
yours and
Star Trek cast member at the booth signing autographs.
I know. And you
That's
know what?
right.
As a lifelong Trek fan, I'm a little ashamed to say somehow I didn't get over there to meet him that year. So I'm still a little bit remiss that
Garrett was wonderful.
Oh yeah. Yeah. He's I've read interviews with him and from other conventions that he attends and other things that he does on the fan level. And yeah, he's great.
Do you know what Artemis is?
Yes, okay. I do.
Well, for people listening that don't know, Artemis is this digital game they run at gaming conventions. They take a room, they set up a bunch of tables laid out like the bridge on the Enterprise. Okay, and everybody's got a console. And so you'll have the engineer, the navigator, the captain, the weapons officer, science officer, and y'all play that role. And it's all run interactively. You got a big view screen and you're playing against other teams and other ships. So you're actually running your station doing something. The engineer's got to control the power allocation for the warp engines and the shields and whatnot. And the weapons officer's doing his thing and all this stuff. So Garrett Wong was at our booth and he played Harry Kim on Voyager.
Mm-hmm.
And really great guy, huge gamer, and he was there with a buddy of mine, and he wondered if he could kind of squat at my booth for a few days and sign autographs. It's like, yeah, that's great.
Absolutely.
Hang out all you want. We'll make space for you. Well, the one night we all decided we're going to go play Artemis. And of course, Mr. I was on Star Trek says I get to be the captain. I was on Star Trek. Okay, fine. Get to be. He gets us blown up in 5 minutes. And everybody's just like, what the hell? I look at him, I said, it's no wonder you never made it past ensign on Voyager.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, poor Harry never never got a promotion.
He did much better on the second game.
I've done that a couple times, and it's not as easy as it seems or sounds. It's really not,
because you're expected to be competent at whatever you're doing. But it was just funnier than hell. You walked in, you said, well, I was on Star Trek. I'm the captain. And 5 minutes later, we're space dust.
That's hilarious. No, all that to say, even with the ability to try to get more new customers, let's say, right, interested in Fat Dragon, even with something like that, you're absolutely correct. I think in this day and age, you're getting much more customer engagement on those different platforms than you would in person. Even though they're still fun to a certain degree, and they're still enjoyable. They are. And
I still go to the con, but not as a company. I'm going to network and whatnot. But the dynamic the types of people going to the cons have changed dramatically. It used to be Gen Con and Origins 20 years ago. It was gamers.
Right.
If you were at the con, you were a gamer. Now, thanks to stuff like Big Bang Theory and all this other stuff, you get people coming in. You got the cosplayers coming. You got the gawkers coming just to look at the geek culture stuff.
Right.
So even though these these cons have grown, they haven't necessarily all grown their attendee base with gamers. They've grown them with other segments of the geek culture community, cosplayers or the anime crowd or whatever. So that dilutes the number of people or types of people coming by your booth. Yeah, maybe 10 people just came by in the last 30 minutes, but maybe only 2 of them were serious gamers. Whereas before, 20 years ago or 8 by your booth, they were all gamers. So it's really hard to judge who's going to be coming by the booth. Am I going to be pulling the gamer? Until they start segregating these exhibit halls up, where here's all the tabletop companies are in this area, all the anime companies are over here, all the costume companies are in this area, and do it instead of everything intermixed. It really hinders customers being able to find what they want and come by. I had customers my last few years at Gen Con. Why weren't you there this year? Well, I was there. I never saw you. The exhibit hall was so huge and they couldn't get through it in the crowds.
Yeah.
I think they almost need to have destination areas for the type of products you're into for it to really work with the diverse customer base they're currently seeing at these conventions. Now your smaller ones, GaryCon, Gamehole, those are all gamers.
Sure.
It's like what Gen Con was, 25, 30 years ago.
Right.
And that's why I really wish you and Jason would come to GaryCon or Gamehole, one of the two. I think you'd really like it. But The larger ones, Origins, Gen Con, they've grown a number of people going, but it's not all gamers that are going now. It's a lot of other segments of the kind of the nerd culture thing that we're seeing going on.
Yeah, and it's obviously understandable for those entities to want to do that, right? I mean, we would agree that
it's ticket sales, it's buys,
yeah,
it's money. I mean, they'd be stupid not to want those people there. But they're looking at it from the top down, the number of badges sold. I'm looking at it. I need to get gamers in front of my product because I need to get new gamers on my customer list. Well, if I'm not getting the gamers by my end of the exhibit hall and I'm getting all the anime people because I'm next to a big anime shop or something, that's not benefiting me. That isn't worth my 2 weeks off to get ready for the booth and to be there. That isn't worth my financial outlay, the hotels. Whereas I can go on my YouTube channel. That's a dedicated tabletop gaming YouTube channel. And the only people that go there are for tabletop gaming, interest. So again, it's just things have changed. Things aren't what they were when I started out 18 years ago, and you got to change with them.
Yep. And you have been doing that with Fat Dragon, obviously. Been keeping things fresh and evolving, we'll say. So I'll put links in the show notes for this when it goes out, but we'll have all the links for where folks can find your products, not only directly from your website, but from Drive-Thru and other sources. We'll have all those links in the show notes for this episode. But wanted to kind of get you out of here, Tom, and thanks again for your time today. But wanted to get you out here on kind of a series of rapid fire questions. Some of these are based on my personal knowledge of you and knowing each other for as long as we have, and they're definitely not to be made to be taken seriously. I'll put it that way. So we'll start off with the first one here. So what's your favorite Rush album? If you had to pick one.
You literally just cut out. You said we're going to get started with, and you cut out.
Oh, well, apologies. Let's try that again. So I was just going to do a couple of little show ending rapid fire questions here. And like I said, these are based on me knowing you for as long as I have and knowing your interest in. So I'll start with this one. So what's your favorite Rush album of all time? If you had to pick one.
Oh, 2112.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
That's not a bad. I mean, there's really the I think the correct answer is all of them, but that's a really good one.
Now when we got into later years, I think we have to admit things slid a little bit.
Well, fair enough, but I still like Signals a lot, and I don't know if that's.
I like Signals, but it doesn't compare to 2112.
I know, I agree.
Caressive Steel was amazing. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
And it's my opinion on that could probably change day by day. Caressive Steel versus 2112, but I think there's probably a few more days than not that I would say 2112 is the best.
Hey, fair enough. Solid answer for sure. Tom, if you had to have one type of food the rest of your life, what would you choose? What is there a particular type?
Oh, anything cow.
Okay, fair enough. Anything cow.
I like my bovine.
Fair enough. Now, am I correct that was it your dad or your grandfather that was a Navy man, or was it both?
Neither. My dad was in the Marine Corps.
Oh, sorry. I thought Navy for some reason. Well, no. Okay. So knowing
kind of my adopted dad, my birth dad died when I was a kid, and then I had kind of an adopted dad that was my mentor for a lot of years. He died a few years ago. He was a lifer in the Air Force from World War II on. Okay. And that's how I got into military publishing, was through his encouragement and stuff. But, okay.
Well, I was off.
The Navy is just the Marine Corps' Uber, by the way.
Well, right. I know, right. Well, knowing that now, and like I said, for some reason I thought it was Navy. Do you have a favorite military aircraft? One that you just like above all the rest?
Oh, are we going to narrow this to a particular time period?
That's totally however you want to interpret that question, sir.
Oh, wow. That's a horrible question.
I know, it's like asking for your favorite child, right?
Oh, that's easy. This is hard. You have kids, you have a favorite. You won't admit it, but you do. Wow. I would have to say the Martin B-10B. Okay. I love that plane.
Okay. And was that what you'll have to help me along?
That was an interwar period. It was the first all-metal bomber that the U.S. Army Air Corps ever flew. Okay. Huh. Everything prior to that was fabric covered, but this was the first all-metal bomber that we flew. Okay. Back in the 30s.
Well, there you go.
Martin B10B.
Martin B10B. All right, there you go. Tell them what other companies, game companies out there in the wild that you kind of look at and you kind of dig in what they're doing. You know, you're kind of I don't know if admiring would be the right word, but what other companies, game companies out there today are doing things that you kind of take notice of, and you know, and maybe none. I don't know. I know you're busy, so you may not have time to really look at that, but you know, are there any other companies or game, companies that are doing stuff today that has made you take notice, I should say?
I think I would. There's a lot of. It would depend on what your criteria is for what you're noticing. I think that two of the companies I've just really get a lot of inspiration from, the owners I know really well, be Troll Lord and Frog God Games.
Mm-hmm.
I've known both of them for a long time. Those are two people that I do enjoy bouncing ideas off of, or hashing out what's going on in the industry, to get a different perspective, because that's one thing you have to be so careful of in any industry as a business owner, is you don't get tunnel vision with how you think things are, or where
Sure.
you think the industry is going, or where your place is in it. You need to get outside perspectives. That is essential for staying current and staying relevant and productive in any industry. Is you've got to get those outside perspectives, because it's too easy to get sucked into stuff. Oh, this will be a great product because I love it. I love X, therefore everybody else will love it when I do it. No, that's never the case. Just because you personally like something doesn't mean the market will respond favorably to it.
Sure. Okay.
So it is good to have other people that you trust, or and I won't say have the same views as you do or anything like that, because you want those differing perspectives, but
Yep.
who are good at reading the tea leaves on the market, and where the market's going and stuff, that you can trust. And also that you trust, as far as they aren't bullshitting you on what they're
Sure.
seeing with their sales and stuff.
Sure.
We all are upfront with each other, and it's nice having people like that to bounce things off of.
Yeah, that real talk is
Mhm.
I'm sure invaluable for you in that regard. So I was going to ask the soda question, but we already got to that early in the show here, so I'll skip that one. So are you a Star Trek original series guy or a Next Generation guy?
Oh, original series. God, how's that even a question?
Well, I mean, you're a little bit older than me, and I didn't grow up with the original series. I grew up with the Next Generation. So, but I know, I hear you. I just thought I'd ask for clarity's sake. And then finally, Tom, I'll send you off with this last question. What's your favorite RPG of all time? What's the one that you go back to every time that, you had the most fun with, or the best experiences with? Well, if you had to pick one, what would that be?
Oh, I think the most fun with is the original first edition FASA Star Trek.
Ooh, nice.
Oh, and it came down. It's not anything to do with the RPG itself.
Sure.
It's the group of players we had playing it.
Yeah.
I remember one game we had one guy. He was the engineer, so he couldn't be on the away team. Somebody had to stand the ship. He literally got bored and set the self-destruct. And in the campaign, blew the ship up because he got bored. He didn't go on the. But I mean, it's just, I think that was just, we had a crap load of fun with that RPG. Yep. And, I love others, anything from the 80s.
Sure.
The original first edition Call of Cthulhu Champions was wonderful back then. When it comes to D&D, my first love is BX and OD&D. Just because I ran my campaign on that for decades, that framework. But yeah, FASA, first edition FASA Trek was just a blast, just because we did that for like an entire summer, and the group of kids we had, it was just fantastic. And again, it had nothing to do with the game. It came down to a group of people playing it.
And you know what? That's what you find, I think, time and time again when you talk to people. It's almost never about the game itself. It was about the collection of people around that table that made it.
And that's just it. And that's why
so memorable.
All the edition wars crap you see online on Facebook and whatnot, just if you're killing orcs, stealing our treasure, and having fun, it's the right game for you.
Yep.
The numbers on the page are meaningless. It's the group of people playing that make it a good game or a bad game.
Agreed.
The only exception to that is 4th edition D&D. That is just absolute crap. I'm saying it for the masses forever. It's recorded now, but everything else, the edition doesn't matter. If you're having fun, it's the right edition for you.
Agreed 100%. That's what to me what sets role-playing games apart from the other types of tabletop gaming that are available is, that collection of people around a table as you're crafting a story together collectively. That's really the biggest difference between role-playing games and other types of gaming, which I enjoy just as much in their own ways. But well, Tom, I thank you for your time. Is there anything else that you want to impart as we exit with either Fat Dragon or yourself? I would just
like to reiterate that I was first ahead of Chenault on this show.
Yes.
I was picked because I was deemed to be the superior guest.
Yes, I would.
And more desirable for the inaugural episode of this fine podcast.
Well, I appreciate it, and those are all kind words. And I'm hoping that this will grow an audience, and it's something that hopefully people will find interesting. Because I enjoy myself just conversating with people one-on-one and getting to hear their stories and learning more about their history with tabletop gaming and what their love is of it ultimately. So thanks again, Tom, and
thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And hopefully we'll see each other soon in person. I'm like I said, I
expect you and Jason at GaryCon next year.
Well, I'm tentatively trying to make that. I was looking at it this past spring. We had a family vacation planned, which was a great trip, and we had a lot of fun. But that was literally the same week as GaryCon. So so far I don't know that that's in the works, but we'll see. But that's my goal is to get there next spring. And
I don't know what other ones I'll be doing next year. So if we're going to get together in 2023, that'd be your safest.
That'd be the one. Yeah. So, well, Tom, thanks again, and have a good rest of your day.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk soon.